Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Story Lab. Today, we will practice English with a B2 to C1 level shadowing story. Listen carefully, pause the video, repeat after me, copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. This is the shadowing technique. Now, let's begin. The email arrived at 9:17 a.m. It was short, too short. Please come to conference room B at 10 a.m. No explanation, no context, no subject line. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to convince myself that it meant nothing. Maybe it was about the new marketing strategy. Maybe it was about the quarterly performance review. Maybe it was something positive. But deep down, I knew. For the past 3 months, the company had been struggling. Sales were lower than expected. Investors were nervous. Rumors about restructuring had been floating around the office like invisible smoke. Still, I had never imagined that it would affect me. I was one of the top performers. At least, that's what I believed. For 5 years, I had worked at that company. I arrived earlier than everyone else and left later than most. I rarely took vacations. I answered emails at midnight. I canceled birthdays, dinners, even holidays because the project needed me. My job was not just my job. It was my identity. When people asked, "Who are you?" I didn't say, "I am Anna." I said, "I'm a senior brand strategist at one of the fastest growing tech companies in the city." My title made me feel important, necessary, valuable. At 9:58 a.m., I walked toward conference room B. The hallway felt longer than usual. My heels made sharp sounds against the floor. Every step echoed in my head. Inside the room were 3 people: my manager, the HR director, and someone I had never seen before. That was the moment I understood. The stranger introduced himself as an external consultant. That phrase always means one thing: decisions have already been made. My manager avoided eye contact. The HR director smiled with professional sympathy. "We appreciate everything you've done for the company," she began. That sentence always sounds like a compliment, but it never is. Unfortunately, due to organizational restructuring, your position has been eliminated. Eliminated. Such a clean word for something so violent. I felt my body go completely still. My ears were ringing. Their voices continued, explaining severance packages, transition support references. But I could not process the information. One thought repeated in my mind: this cannot be happening to me. I had sacrificed too much. I had given too much. How is this possible? I finally asked. The consultant answered calmly: "This decision is not performance related, it's strategic." Strategic, another elegant word. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand. In reality, I felt something breaking inside me. When I left the building with a small box of my belongings, the city looked different. The sky seemed too bright. The streets were too loud. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. I did not cry, not yet. Instead, I felt empty, as if someone had erased my future in a single hour. I imagined telling my parents, my friends. What would they think? She got fired. The words felt heavy. In my world, being fired was a failure. It meant you were not good enough, not strong enough, not valuable enough. By the time I reached home, the shock had transformed into anger. How could they do this to me? After everything? I opened my laptop and reread my old performance reviews. Outstanding leadership, exceptional commitment, high impact results. If I was so exceptional, why was I unemployed? That evening, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the job, but for the version of myself I thought I was. The confident professional, the woman with a clear path, the person who believed that hard work guaranteed security. That night, I could not sleep. For the first time in years, my calendar was empty, and the silence was terrifying. I did not know it yet, but that silence was about to change everything. The first morning after I was fired, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. I reached for my phone to check emails. Then I remembered. There were no emails, no urgent messages, no calendar reminders, no meetings. My schedule, which had once been color-coded and meticulously organized, was now completely blank. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For years, I had complained about being exhausted. I had dreamed of having free time. I had imagined peaceful mornings with coffee and sunlight. Now I had all the time in the world, and it felt unbearable. I got up anyway. I dressed as if I were going to the office. I made coffee. I opened my laptop and updated my resume with mechanical precision. Senior brand strategist, 5 years of experience, led cross-functional teams, increased revenue by 23%. The words looked impressive, but they felt strangely disconnected from me. Who was I without the title, without the office, without the constant validation of being needed? That question disturbed me more than the job loss itself. By the third day, the calls began, friends asking, "So, what happened?" Colleagues saying, "It's not personal, it's business." One former coworker even said, "You're lucky. You'll find something better." Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt discarded. On the fourth day, I met my best friend Sophia for lunch. She listened quietly as I explained everything in detail: the email, the meeting, the consultant, the box. When I finished, she didn't say, "You'll be fine." She asked a different question. "Were you happy there?" I paused. Of course I was happy. I had status, income, prestige. But happiness? I hesitated too long. Sophia noticed. "You were always stressed," she said gently. "You canceled plans all the time. You stopped painting. You stopped traveling. You stopped laughing." I opened my mouth to defend myself. But she was right. Somewhere between promotions and performance reviews, I had become someone constantly chasing the next achievement. I told myself it was ambition, but maybe it was fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of being replaceable. Ironically, I had become replaceable anyway. That realization hurt more than the termination itself. Over the next 2 weeks, I applied for dozens of positions. I personalized cover letters. I networked. I reached out to recruiters. Some companies responded politely, others never replied. Each rejection felt like a confirmation of my worst insecurity. Maybe I was not as talented as I thought. One evening, after receiving yet another automated rejection email, I closed my laptop in frustration. I went to the balcony and looked at the city skyline. For years, those buildings had symbolized ambition. Now they looked like glass cages. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. When I was younger, before corporate life consumed me, I had wanted to start my own creative consultancy, a small agency focused on ethical branding and storytelling. I'd even drafted a business plan once, but I abandoned the idea because it felt risky, unstable, impractical. So I chose security, or what I believed was security. The irony was almost poetic. I lost the secure job, and now for the first time, risk no longer seemed terrifying. What was I protecting anyway? I had already experienced the worst case scenario, unemployment, and I was still alive. That thought shifted something inside me. The next morning, instead of sending resumes, I opened an old folder labeled Side Project. Inside were notes, sketches, ideas, brand narratives, campaign concepts, creative frameworks. As I read them, I felt something unfamiliar: excitement, not anxiety, not obligation, genuine curiosity. I spent the entire day refining those ideas, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. By evening, I realized something profound. For the first time in years, I was working without fear, no manager to impress, no performance metrics to satisfy, no competition, just me and my ideas. The following week, I contacted a small startup whose founder I had once met at a conference. I offered to help them with their branding strategy, freelance, short-term, experimental. He agreed. It wasn't a full-time job. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. As I began working on that project, something changed in my posture, my voice, even my thinking. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was choosing. The distinction was subtle but powerful. I didn't know whether this path would succeed. I didn't know whether I would earn as much money. I didn't know whether it would become stable. But for the first time, stability was not my primary goal. Alignment was, and that realization felt liberating. Being fired had shattered my identity. But in the silence that followed, I began constructing a new one that was not dependent on a company, one that was not built solely on external validation, one that felt authentic. I used to believe that losing my job was the worst thing that could happen. Now I was beginning to suspect it might be the most honest thing that had ever happened to me. 3 months after I was fired, I stopped referring to it as the worst day of my life. It had transformed into something else, a turning point. In the beginning, I measured time by rejection emails and unanswered applications. Each silence from a recruiter felt like a verdict on my competence. I questioned my skills, my experience, even my intelligence. But gradually, something shifted. The freelance project I had taken just to stay busy began to expand. The startup founder introduced me to another entrepreneur. That introduction led to a strategy session. That session turned into a contract. For the first time, I was building something without waiting for permission. There was no corporate hierarchy, no rigid performance review system, no political maneuvering. There was only value exchange. If my ideas created impact, I was paid. If they didn't, I improved them. It was brutally simple and strangely empowering. One afternoon, while preparing a brand presentation for a client, I caught myself smiling. Not because the work was easy, but because it felt meaningful. I wasn't optimizing metrics for a board of investors who barely knew my name. I was helping small founders clarify their vision. I was translating purpose into strategy. The irony was almost overwhelming. For years, I believed I was indispensable at my old company. In reality, I had been replaceable. Now, working independently, I was no longer chasing the illusion of security. I was cultivating relevance. There is a profound difference between the two. Security depends on systems you cannot control. Relevance depends on skills you continuously refine. That distinction redefined my relationship with work. One evening, I received a message from a former colleague. "Anna, we're struggling with a campaign. Any chance you'd be open to consulting?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. 6 months earlier, I would have felt validated. Now I felt detached. They hadn't fired me because I lacked ability. They had fired me because I was convenient to eliminate. Business had never been personal, it was structural. And once I understood that, I stopped taking it personally. I agreed to consult, but on my terms. Flexible hours, clear boundaries, defined deliverables. For the first time in my professional life, I negotiated without fear. And they agreed. That was the moment I realized something transformative. I had been underestimating my leverage for years. The corporate environment had conditioned me to equate loyalty with sacrifice, to believe that exhaustion was proof of dedication, to interpret stress as ambition. But stepping outside that system exposed a different truth. Exhaustion is not excellence. Overwork is not identity. And loyalty without boundaries is self-erasure. As my freelance practice grew, I became more selective. I turned down projects that felt misaligned. I declined clients who demanded unrealistic timelines. Old Anna would have accepted everything out of fear. New Anna understood something crucial. Scarcity mindset creates dependency. Clarity creates authority. Financially, the first few months were unstable. There were moments of doubt, weeks when income was unpredictable, nights when anxiety resurfaced. But even in uncertainty, I felt more grounded than I had ever felt in corporate stability. Because this uncertainty was chosen, and chosen uncertainty feels very different from imposed instability. 1 year after being fired, I met Sophia again for lunch. "You look different," she said immediately. "How?" I asked. "Lighter," she replied, "less tense." She wasn't wrong. My schedule was still full, but not suffocating. My work was still demanding, but not depleting. Most importantly, my sense of worth was no longer tied to a title. For years, I introduced myself by my corporate role. Now, when someone asked what I did, I said, "I help brands find clarity." It was concise, but it was also authentic. The greatest shift, however, was internal. I no longer feared being fired, because I no longer defined myself by employment. Losing my job dismantled an illusion, the illusion that stability comes from external approval. In reality, resilience comes from adaptability. Competence is portable. Creativity is renewable. Identity is not confined to a business card. Occasionally, I still think about that email at 9:17 a.m. At the time, it felt like an ending. Now I see it as a redirection. Had I not been forced out, I would have remained comfortable but constrained. I would have continued trading energy for validation. Instead, I was compelled to confront an uncomfortable question. Who am I without institutional recognition? The answer took time to emerge. I am disciplined without supervision. I am strategic without structure. I am capable without confirmation. Being fired stripped away my external scaffolding. What remained was self-trust. Oh, sometimes losing what you thought you needed reveals what you actually possess. That is why I can now say, without hesitation, getting fired didn't ruin me. It recalibrated me. It forced me to outgrow a version of success that no longer fit. And in doing so, it saved me. Now let's practice. Listen again. Pause after each sentence. Repeat out loud. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. Focus on the advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. This is the shadowing technique. It builds fluency and confidence. If you found this story meaningful, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone improving their English. See you in the next story.